Hi, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So I wanted to do another tag today. So this one was made by Zoe from Zoe's All Booked, and it's called the Nope Trope tag, and I really loved watching her video on it. And there's something about getting to talk about and vent about books that weren't as great as you were expecting them to be, which I know I'll be allowed to do with a few of these prompts. So yeah, this just sounded like a fun thing to do, a nice little tag for today, and I'm just loving these prompts. So the first one is Eavesdropping with miscommunication. So basically name a book that you've heard great things about and you were expecting to love but ended up hating. For this one, I had quite a few that I could have chosen, unfortunately, but the one that I did end up going with was Circe by Madeline Miller. I thought that I was gonna love it. I was really into mythology in school, and so I thought that a more adult book that still lives in that like mythology space would be a lot of fun to read, but I ended up just like not liking it at all. I was bored for most of it. I didn't really care about what happened. I think there's something about having this like grand story that spans like years and years and years makes me just like not care at all like what's going to happen. And I enjoyed the like thought of Circe and the general idea of the plot and how she kind of comes into her own, but I just found myself the whole time being like, I don't know what the climax of this book's supposed to be, and I don't really care. Like, there's not any scene that I'm really hoping to see or anything, and I didn't think I needed that in a book, but apparently I do. So the next trope is love triangles, which is to name a series where you can't pick your favorite book. For me, I'm gonna go with Life as We Knew It, which is by Susan Pfeffer. So this was a book series that I read in high school. At my high school, we got a long list of books and we could choose one of them to be one of our summer reading books. So we had the ones that we had to read for whatever English class we were going into, and then also everybody picked from that same list, and then we would kind of do like this book club discussion when we got back after the summer, so people from different grades and everything would be in it, and we would talk about whatever book you picked. So this was the book that I picked, was Life as We Knew It. I totally loved it, and I'm gonna try my best to remember what it's about because it's been a long time since I read it, and I did reread the first one. So basically something knocked the moon closer to the earth, and then there's all this fallout because of that. And it's told from the perspective of a young teenage girl that is writing in her diary. So you get all of her diary entries. The second book is told from another perspective, but covers the same time span, and that's from a young boy's perspective, and it's his diary entries. And then the third book is both of them together. That was really exciting for me because I loved both stories independently and then getting them together. But I can't decide which of their two stories I liked more, or if I like more them being together in a book. Since this, I believe there's been a fourth book published, which is really cool. And I have thought about going back and rereading. That's why I reread the first book. I intended to read the fourth, but I just never really got around to it. And it is very YA, which I didn't realize obviously when I was reading it because all I read at the time was YA and I loved it. But it does hold this special place in my heart. And not only that, but that was the first time that I emailed an author after reading a book to like ask her questions about it. And then I also asked if she was thinking about doing a fourth book at the time because there was only 3 published, and I like tore through those. And she actually responded and everything, which was unbelievable to me at the time. I couldn't believe that an author would like have enough time in their day to be able to like respond to some 14-year-old girl's email to them. So that was an incredible experience, and I think more grounded the fact that like authors are people too. But yeah, all around loved that series. So the third prompt, or the third trope, is not like other girls / didn't know I'm beautiful, that whole trope, which is name a book that has a pretty cover but was boring as hell. I was tempted to pick Daisy Jones and the Six for me because I think that that is a rather unpopular opinion, but it also, Zoe from Zoe's All Booked has the same unpopular opinion. And she talked about it in her trope video, so I didn't want to do the same one, but definitely beautiful cover, did not like it. So I ended up instead going with This Is How You Lose the Time War. This is a book I was so excited about and I loved the cover of. The cover was what grabbed my attention, the title as well. It sounds so incredibly interesting, and it was a surprisingly short book for what the topic seemed to be. But for how short it was, it took me forever to get through because this story was so loose. It was kind of like Circe in that way, where it was just this like loose story where you only kind of understood what was going on. But at least in Circe, there were like moments where it was like, okay, I understand the story right now. Whereas in This Is How You Lose the Time War, I felt like I never had an idea. Basically, there were like these two entities, I don't even know what to call them, and they were talking to each other across time, and they were like trying to change different events to sway towards like their ends. Like they both were serving an even higher power, and they were on opposite sides, and yeah, they were like falling in love. That is the best I can describe that book, and I read it. It was not my cup of tea, but it looked like it was going to be. It looked like a book that was made for me, and then I just didn't enjoy it at all. Okay, so for 4 and 5, I actually have my books for both of them could be interchangeable. So 4, the trope is All-Consuming Love, or a book that gave you a book hangover, and 5 is The Douchebag Boyfriend, which is a book that took you a while to get into, but then you ended up loving it. For both the books that I have for these, they're kind of interchangeable. I felt it took me a while to get into both of them, but I also ended up loving both of them, and they both gave me a book hangover. So I'm just going to talk about both of them. And you can decide which goes to which. So the first is The Overstory by Richard Powers. This is a book that is told from several different perspectives, but it all is rooted, tree pun, but it's all rooted in this deforestation dilemma, and each of the characters is impacted in one way or another by just trees and nature in general. It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful book. I love it. Also, it is beautiful, just in general. I absolutely love this story. It took me a while to get into it for sure, but each of the characters I thought were really cool. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. I feel like that's pretty clear by the way I'm talking about it. But, and I ended up keeping it, which for me is a really big deal. When I keep a book that I've already read, it means that I will likely want to read it again, and that it just like, there were all these good feelings while I read it, and I just want to see it on my bookshelf. I don't tend to keep books that I didn't enjoy or that I didn't even love. Usually, like nothing below a 4-star is staying on my bookshelf, typically. But my bookshelf is mostly made up of 5-star books. And then the other book that I feel like fits both of these for me is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amal. I just looked up his name, the pronunciation of his name for this video, because I've been saying it out loud, knowing full well that I was probably pronouncing it wrong, and oh my gosh, both the first and last name I was pronouncing so wrong. But Amal. So A Gentleman in Moscow, and then also his other book, Rules of Civility. I loved both of them. This one, I think it's just a little bit higher. There was a while after I'd read Rules of Civility, and it had been longer since I'd read Gentleman in Moscow, that I liked that one more, but I think as more time passes, this one just still stands out to me. But basically it is about Count Alexander Rostov that is put under house arrest, but he's put under house arrest in a hotel in Moscow. The story just follows him inside the hotel the whole time, which sounds like a boring premise, but it was actually just amazing to see him make these relationships with different people that were in the hotel and go on these kind of adventures without ever leaving that building. And there was so many great quotes in this book. It was just fun to live in this space with Alexander, and I could definitely see myself reading this book over and over just to kind of revisit the hotel. There's something about a book that takes place entirely inside of one building where the hotel itself seems huge even though he can't leave it, but also it has like this hominess to it at different points as you get more used to the different areas in the hotel and just the different people in general. I really loved it. I think it's such a great book. But yeah, another one, it took me a while to get into, but it stuck with me for so long after I finished. And then the last kind of prompt is a trope that you either hate or love. This is kind of tough for me. I feel like I usually go for more thriller tropes, but each one that I think of, I don't really hate or love any of them. I think that any of the thriller tropes, at least for me, can be done really right and can also be done really wrong. And it just depends on like the last way that I've seen the trope written, how I feel about it. So I decided to kind of think back into my YA days and think about the tropes that really bugged me or that I really loved there. And for me, a trope that I really hated to see was love at first sight, but I feel like everybody hates that, right? Like, who likes that? It just seems so unrealistic. It's so hard to read for me, and if I don't believe in the story, then what's the point, right? Like, it doesn't make me excited that the two end up together. It's like, yeah, clearly. And then for one that I love, Hate to Love has always been like a really fun and interesting one. I think it's one that can be done a lot of different ways, which is why I think it would take a while to get old for me, as long as it doesn't start in a place that's like too unbelievable that they would end up together. Because sometimes I feel like the hate in Hate to Love starts at like a place of abuse or something like that, and then it becomes really unbelievable for me, or it makes it hard to ever root for at all. So yeah, that was all of the prompts for the Nope trope. This was a lot of fun to talk through this one. I really enjoyed it. Thanks to Zoe from Zoe's All Booked for creating the tag in the first place, and thank you to you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you subscribe to see more. All right, bye.